Hi there, and welcome to our presentation of Dare to Lead Workplace Values. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Amanda Duff. I'm a certified coach, HR consultant, and leadership advisor. A little bit about me: I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. I also have a master's degree in human resources. I am SHRM CP certified, and I'm a certified SEI coach. So, what does all that mean, and why should you care? I got my bachelor's degree in accounting. I started off as an accountant out of college. I worked at Ernst & Young for a few years before moving over to the human resources side of things. I just felt very passionate about that area. And without having had the educational background, I went back and earned my master's degree in the field of human resources with a focus on organizational leadership. I also earned my SHRM CP certification and just recently went through a social and emotional intelligence coaching certification course. I'm also the founder and CEO of Now What. We provide fractional HR services, short-term and long-term assignments, HR compliance and special projects, one-on-one and group coaching and leadership training, team support or team building, and M&A support. So if any of those services are ever something that you yourself personally or your business is finding yourself in need of, please feel free to reach out anytime. So without further ado, let's get into it. So our training today is based on the work of Brené Brown and her book Dare to Lead. This is arguably one of my most favorite leadership books. I recommend this book to anybody who either has the title of a leader or even if they don't, quite honestly. There are so many things in this book that I'm constantly finding myself referring back to. So Brené is a researcher and best-selling author known for her work on courage, vulnerability, and empathy. Specifically, we're going to explore her concept of values as guiding principles for showing up as our best selves, especially in tough moments. So today's objective is to better understand each other by exploring our values that guide us and motivate us, and mostly to better understand yourself as well. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of an exercise. But before we do that, I do want to talk about why values matter in teams. By understanding our individual and shared values, we can strengthen relationships, enhance collaboration, and celebrate diversity. So it's so important that we take time to understand what our values are while we are at work and why it matters. So strengthening relationships, that will happen by knowing your values because you'll gain insight into what matters most to yourself. But then also, if you do this with other team members, you'll start learning what matters to other team members. You'll also build empathy and trust by going through that exercise together. And in a little bit, I'll talk about how this type of presentation can be developed for your team if you'd like to do something like that as well. Values matter in teams because it enhances collaboration. If you go through this exercise together, you can identify shared priorities and align your efforts to create a cohesive and value-driven team culture. And lastly, celebrating diversity. Appreciate the unique perspectives and strengths that come from our different values, recognizing how they contribute to our collective success. Diversity in teams is so important. If you had the same type of person on your team, if your team was just made up of the same person, carbon copy, copy, paste over and over, it would be extremely boring, first of all. You wouldn't be very innovative. And it would just simply not create an environment in which you would be able to create the best value for your clients, your products, whatever it is. So I'm going to pause right here for a moment and let you take a look at this list of values. So in Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead, she has this list here, and it's quite an extensive list, so take your time. I'm going to ask you to just quickly look through this and see if there is a value word that speaks to you as something that resonates with you most as it relates to work. So sometimes when I give this presentation, it's interesting. One of two things can happen. Either people find that the value that stands out to them most is most prevalent both in their personal and professional life, or sometimes they're very different. So take a minute, think about while you're at work, what types of values resonate with you the most. And then keep that value in your mind. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a long list. Usually, if I'm giving this presentation to a team, I will send this to you ahead of time, or in your one-on-one coaching, I'll send this to you ahead of time. You'll have ample time to look through it. I usually recommend that people look through the whole list first and just kind of highlight ones that stand out just to narrow it down because it's a big list. And then once you have those highlighted values, to kind of go back and really think about which one really means the most to me at work. But for now, if there's one that just speaks to you in any way, shape, or form, let's just pick that one and we'll work with it here. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to look here. And remember, it's as it relates to you at work. So working with your teams, your colleagues, your boss, your managers. All right, now that we've got that value in our mind, write it down somewhere, put it somewhere where you can see it, flag it so that we remember what it is when we circle back to it in just a minute. So just for example's sake, I'm going to go through my own top 3 work values. And I know I told you to pick one, but if we were to do this one-on-one or with a team of yours, we would likely go through 3. And so I've given an example of my top 3 personal work values, which are courage, integrity, and curiosity. Now, I do recommend that people every once in a while go back and revisit these values because they might change over time and they might not. There are so many great values. There's not a bad one in sight. They're all great for different reasons. These are just the 3 that resonate with me the most deeply currently. So my top work value, and honestly personal value, is courage. So on page 271 in Dare to Lead, Brene Brown says, the level of collective courage in an organization is the absolute best predictor of that organization's ability to be successful. A couple other quotes that always stand out to me about courage is, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. That's by Joseph Campbell. And then my absolute favorite quote from Glennon Doyle in her book Untamed. She says, if you can't beat fear, do it scared. I tell myself this all the time. Another one of my work values is integrity. And Brene defines this in her book as, if someone has integrity, you choose courage over comfort. You choose what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy. And you choose to practice your values rather than simply professing them. And then third on my list here is curiosity. And that's defined again by Brene as, it's only when diverse perspectives are included, respected, and valued that we can start to get a full picture of the world, who we serve, and what we need, and how to successfully meet people where they are. Curiosity is an act of vulnerability and courage. And it is interesting if you take the time to kind of think about which values resonate with you and then just reflect on them a little bit. You'll notice if you look at mine, there's a theme here. My top value is courage, yet my other 2 talk about courage as well. Integrity is choosing courage over comfort, and curiosity is an act of vulnerability and courage. So just an interesting theme that if and when you go through this exercise and kind of pick out your top 3, you might see a theme within them. Now, why did I take the time to define these? I wanted to talk through what each of these values meant to me, because that matters significantly, especially if you are working with your teams and learning what their values are. You want to make sure you understand what that means to them. We don't want to make any assumptions. If someone's top value is courage, I don't want you to make an assumption about what that means to me. I want you to be very clear from my perspective. This is how I define courage. Everybody's got a different definition for different things. So if you're doing this with somebody, or even just for yourself, it's very important that you make sure to sit down and define what these mean to you. So if curiosity is a top value for you, what does curiosity mean? So curiosity to me specifically, in addition to this definition, means having generous assumptions, getting very curious as to why something is happening or why somebody is doing what they're doing so that I can get to the root cause of an issue. Okay. So once we've defined our values, now we're going to dig into them a little bit. And this is something I'm sure, I don't know, maybe this is a quote that came from somebody fancy and super smart. Actually, it did. It came from my husband, but you know what I'm trying to say. Maybe there's somewhere on the internet, you could probably attribute this quote to somebody, but this actually came from my husband. And it was something he said to me years ago that really resonated with me. At the time, particularly in my personal life, empathy was probably one of my most guiding values, or at least something that was showing up for me a lot. And it was kind of taking over my life. Now, I'm still a very empathetic person, but I didn't have good boundaries with my empathy at that point in time. And my husband told me, you know, empathy is both your greatest quality and your biggest downfall. And I thought, whoa. I said, what do you mean by that? And what he said was, you are so empathetic, which is great. It allows you to connect with people and be really present and there for them and supportive. But if you're not careful and you don't have good boundaries with it, you tend to take on those feelings as your own. And now it's kind of driving your emotions, how you're walking around the world. So, for example, if somebody is extremely upset and sad, if that's a good friend of mine and I'm supporting them, I am probably also upset and sad on their behalf. Again, a great quality, but if now it's affecting my mood and the way I'm showing up in the world and the way I'm connecting and interacting with other people, that can be a downfall. So it's just something that I've been aware of for myself ever since then. And it's been extremely illuminating for me to kind of look at my values with that lens. So I'd like to do that together. So think about the value that you wrote down, or if you have it with you, pull it out, grab a piece of paper or something. And I want you to be thinking about that value and how it helps you and how it hurts you. So I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to again use my own. So here we've got my top 3 work values again: courage, integrity, and curiosity. And so courage is extremely helpful because I'm willing to speak up in challenging situations, advocating for what I believe is right, even when it's uncomfortable. So even if I'm in a room full of fancy people and I think that something is not right, or I have an opinion or something that I think matters, even though I'm really uncomfortable, I'll say it anyways. So that's really great. The ability for me to have the courage to do that has served me very well. However, it can also sometimes be hurtful because my willingness to challenge the status quo can be perceived as confrontational or judgmental. So what do I do about this? I obviously still want to be very courageous. I just need to have awareness that this can sometimes happen to me. So now I'm going to be a little bit more mindful, depending on who's in the room with me, what the topic of conversation is, what the venue is, in maybe how I speak up in those challenging situations. Maybe I won't call somebody out in the middle of a meeting. Maybe I'll pull them aside afterwards and have a conversation if it's more of a one-on-one thing. Or maybe I'll choose my words a little bit differently. I'm just going to be more thoughtful when I'm speaking up in uncomfortable situations. I'm not saying I'm not going to speak up. I absolutely am, because I'm going to lean into courage. It's one of the things I think is so great about me as a leader. But I do need to be very careful about how and when I am speaking up in this way, just to make sure that my intention is not to be confrontational and judgmental. So I just need to be a little bit careful of that. Secondly, with integrity, it's very helpful because I'm dependable, I'm consistent, and I'm always following through on commitments, which is great. It's exactly what you want in a leader. So I love that about me. It can be hurtful because I might be overly critical of myself or others if I perceive a lack of alignment with shared values. What do I mean by that? This actually trips me up a lot. I still struggle with this. I have to catch myself in this all the time. So, what this means is because one of my top work values is integrity, I have a really hard time when people don't share my same values. So, for example, we just talked about courage. If somebody is not also courageous in difficult times in which, like, in your gut you need to say something, but they just don't because they're overwhelmed with fear, or maybe it's easier not to say something, that will intensely infuriate me. It just really bothers me and it can overwhelm me. And that's not a feeling I want to keep with me. So usually when I'm at work and I feel that sense of overwhelming frustration, it's usually because somebody is acting outside of alignment with a shared or with a value that I hold dear to myself. So I am perceiving that we don't share that value in that moment. Now, that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that person or the way that they're doing things. That has absolutely everything to do with me and how I'm responding to a situation, and not about them. It's about me and my feelings. So I will usually check in with myself. Hey, why am I feeling so triggered right now? Like, where does this feeling come from? Why is it happening? And I'm doing this because I usually feel it somewhere in my chest. I get very frustrated and I feel it physically. And it's usually because I perceive that we're not in alignment of values. And so that's just very helpful for me to know. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody's going to have the same values, and that's okay. Again, diversity is very much encouraged and extremely helpful. So sometimes I just need to check in with myself there. Third one is curiosity. Curiosity is very helpful because I ask thoughtful questions, uncovering deeper insights and perspectives in order to get to the root of an issue. It can be hurtful because my approach can take longer upfront to understand the problems and how to move forward. Especially as a human resources leader and a coach, I've always taken the approach that my job is to ask a lot of questions. I do not like to make assumptions. I will make generous assumptions until proven otherwise. And that usually means that I need to ask a lot of questions to really get to the root of an issue. Because how could I possibly help you figure out what the next step is, or how to move forward, or how to work on something or improve something, if I don't truly know exactly what's going on and what we're trying to accomplish? So I will ask a lot of questions so that I have as much information as humanly possible. I'm not making assumptions as much as I can, and I'm making a very informed next recommendation. However, depending on who I'm working with, especially if it's, perhaps I've worked with some leaders in firms that, especially if it's a very fast paced environment, sometimes those people can be very used to fast solutions, which in my experience does not always lead to quality results. And so my approach can sometimes be frustrating to people because I take a little bit longer. But I do think that taking the time leads to a better quality result. So just depending on who I'm working with, I may need to explain my process up front or what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And just be mindful that perhaps if it's not something that I can have a quick recommendation for, that I may need to just have a little bit more of a discussion with them, because they may think I'm taking too long or I'm not working on it. And that's absolutely not what's happening. So that is how courage, integrity, and curiosity are both helpful and hurtful to me. Again, all great values. Nothing I would change about myself. It's just good to have the awareness of how it's helpful and how it could be hurtful. So now I want to take your value and I'd like you to do the same thing. And maybe you've been doing that as I've been talking through mine, but just think about it. And if we were to do this together as a group, like with your work team or any sort of group that you have, what we would do is we would go around the room, virtual or in person, And we would practice this together. So we'd each pick a value and then talk about how it's helpful and it's hurtful. And I recently did this with a team and it was extremely helpful. We got amazing feedback about this training. They learned so much about each other and what they value and why and how it shows up for them at work. What I want you to remember throughout this exercise and what I want you to leave with here is that who we are is how we lead. The values that you hold dear to yourself at work are your superpowers. They're amazing. That's great. Like I said before, there are no bad values in that list. And whatever value shows up for you the most or is most important to you at this moment in time is great. And that's amazing. That is your superpower. We need to lean into that so that it shines in everything that you do. So we got to figure out how to utilize it as you work together with your teams, as you're a leader, you're working with your direct reports, your colleagues. And we just need to be aware of how it might get in our way sometimes so that you can have a bit more awareness and just be a more informed leader. So, my call to action for you today is to think about one way that you can align your daily actions with one of your core values. And maybe this is something that you already do. Maybe you just need to maybe challenge yourself to put the links together and say, hey, this is something that I am already doing and it links to this value. And now I'm going to be mindful that that's what's happening. Now it's not just something reflexive that I'm doing, but I actually am putting a value to it. Now it's very intentional. Or maybe you can challenge yourself to start doing something new that aligns with one of your values. So, for example, my value on curiosity, if curiosity is defined by you in the same way that it is to me, and that's one of your values, and you'd like to challenge yourself to align a daily action with one of your core values, that could look like when you're having a conversation with someone, make sure that your first response is always a question. It could be simple as that. You know, if you're having a conversation and somebody says something, instead of just replying, or if somebody asks you a question, instead of just replying, maybe instead now you ask a clarifying question first before you reply. Just a good way to kind of align your daily actions with your core values and start practicing that. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Again, my name is Amanda Duff, the CEO and founder of Now What. If this was helpful to you and something you'd like to explore more deeply, please feel free to reach out to us for a free consultation for one-on-one coaching. If this is something that you think your business or your teams could use in a team building exercise, we'd love to customize that for you as well. So thank you for your time.